Promotional consideration paid for by the following. Yo Joe Outlet, your only source for G.I. Joe weapons and vehicle accessories. Don't have that incomplete Joe any longer. Connect with Yo Joe Outlet Center and complete that figure for an awesome price. Go check them out on eBay at Yo Joe Outlet Center and Facebook Yo Joe Outlet. What's up, everybody? Jason up in the New 80s Revolution down here in the quarantine cave. Back with another episode of LJN Wrestling Superstars Revisited. That's right. The line that started this entire worldwide New 80s Revolution craze. The LJNs. The figures, the toy company that put the New 80s Revolution on the map. That made me a wealthy YouTuber. We're going back in time, we're going back in the archives, and we are pulling the LJNs out of the dusty back room. No, that would never happen. We're pulling them off the shelf right over there, and we're bringing them back to you. We're showing them off again. We're retelling some stories. We're telling some new stories, and we're having fun with the toy line that brought the majority of you to this channel. Let's keep it going. We reviewed Series 1 and 1A last time, and now we're going to dive into Series 2, which started hitting stores, I believe, in either very late 85 or very early 86. These figures are all still stamped 1985. Which to me, I really find interesting because, you know, that means that when I was just a kid playing with, you know, Hulk Hogan and Iron Sheik, because that's all that existed, these figures were already in some sort of production stage, right? If they're stamped 1985, they're in some sort of production stage, you know, which is pretty cool to me that, like, you know, as a kid, I have no idea that there's more stuff coming, right? So we're going to take a look at the 6 figures from 1986. And I like that level, or the 6 figures from Series 2. I like that level of production. I like small batches of releases, right? I don't want, you know, Series 3 coming up has, like, I don't know, you know, 14 figures or so in it. And obviously that makes it tougher as a kid to go get, you know, to check them all off your list. So, you know, I like the smaller batches of figures, and kind of reminds me of the way when I was interested in them, when I was collecting them, the Jakks Classic Superstars would always put out, you know, 5, 6, 7 figures per wave. And so, you know, you could easily walk into a Toys R Us and grab them all and just bring them home, and there you go. You got the whole line. You got the whole series. So I like Series 2. Because it's a smaller series, and it's a very important series. The characters in this series were a very active part of my childhood, my play, my federation, if you will. And even though we're telling stories about the my experience with these guys, when this series wraps up, so what we're going to do is we're going to do all the series, obviously. We're going to get into, you know, we'll finish it with the black cards, and that's for the LJN 8-inch figures. And then we're going to talk about the bendies again, and we're going to talk about the thumb wrestlers again, and we're going to talk about the bendy ring, and, you know, we'll show off all that stuff. But then I just want to do an episode of just, you know, LJN play memories. You know, just sit around with you guys and try to just think about, you know, everything I did with these figures and how much fun I had as a kid, and just, man, the literally uncountable hours I spent creating storylines. And I've said before, you know, back in our play days, we were bookers before we even knew what a booker was, right? We were writing, we were either writing or creating and playing out storylines before we even knew what a storyline was. Okay, we were doing that in our own rooms, in our own bedrooms. We were all writers for the WWF at that time. We just didn't know that role existed. You know, I would plan, you know, and this is back at a time when you think like, you know, there's a little bit of, you know, I still think this stuff might be a little real, you know, back then. And I'm planning out winners and losers of matches, you know, before I knew that that's what they actually did. You know, I was planning heel turns and face turns in my head. I was planning title changes in my head. I spent so much time, so many notebooks that I wish I'd saved. I wish I'd saved those notebooks. I've spent so much time, you know, planning out cards and super cards, you know, pay-per-views, and just the best time. And my kid is slowly getting into wrestling figures. He doesn't really watch any wrestling because Raw and SmackDown are just, I can't relate to it, so I have never really shown him that. I think when I get to 1984 WWF in my watching in Wrestling with the Past, I think I might invite him in and have him maybe sit down with me from like January 84, you know, and have him just hang in there and watch and see if this overtakes him like it did me. But you know, I'm also introducing him to AEW, and he's digging that, and the figures are coming out in August, hopefully, if they're still in August. And I think I'm going to get him those, and hopefully he'll be able to, you know, recreate, you know, like I did. So anyway, yeah, those notebooks, man. I wish tons of just matches and goodness. Anyway, let's get to the figures. So, I'll show you one of my favorite figures from this line, and by favorite figure I mean in appearance. This was not a figure that I used as a kid at all, because it's not a figure that I ever had as a kid. I never had this figure during my childhood. This was a adult collection edition, because I already had one. And the idea back then was, you know, why do you need a second one? Yeah, the look changed. And again, that just speaks to kids today. You know, people today are I see them on some of the wrestling figure forums. Anytime a new wrestler gets a new outfit or a new haircut or new facial hair or whatever, you know, the fans are dying to get that figure produced. And I'm like, what a waste of a spot for a figure. What a waste of money. You know, and I think not only was that my mindset back then, but it was also my parents' mindset. You know, we're not buying you a second figure when you already have one. You know, so so I had to wait until I was an adult to get this figure, and he's one of my favorites. He's one of my top 5 favorite LJN figures. It's just a great look. It's such an improvement over the first figure, but I never had him. I never had Andre the Giant #2, lovingly known in the collection world as short-haired Andre. To me, this is a tremendous figure. Just a great looking figure. You know, this is right after, well, not right after, it's about a year after. One of the greatest angles of my childhood. One of, you know, again, top 5, top 10 angles, storylines that I was a part of as a kid was Andre the Giant getting attacked by Ken Patera, Big John Studd, and Bobby Heenan, and they cut Andre's hair. I remember it. It was, Andre picked S.D. Jones to be his tag team partner for whatever reason. And, even as a kid, you thought, wow, something's going to go on here because, why is S.D. Jones his partner? And, of course, at the end, the bad guys just knock out S.D. Jones, and they've got Andre all to themselves, and they do a number on him. And they cut his hair. And, of course, this sets up, or continues to lead to the WrestleMania match between Studd and Andre. But I always thought, well, why? Why would you do that? Why would you cut Andre's hair? What was, this isn't like this lucha libre Mexican, hair versus mask type thing. What's the deal with cutting Andre's hair? Why would you do that? But as a kid, and remember, this is a haircut, okay? It's not a vicious assault. There were no weapons involved. They did not strangle him. They did not mutilate him. They cut his hair. But as a kid, I was shocked and staring at the TV as if I was seeing this bludgeoning. And still to this day, I remember Vince McMahon selling the heck out of the haircut. Just selling it on commentary, just making, and maybe that's why I believed it was such a horrible attack, a heinous attack, because McMahon was telling me it was a heinous attack. And McMahon used the line, "They are raping Andre the Giant." And then he came back quickly and said, "They are raping the dignity of Andre the Giant." And I think as in 85 or so, late 84, whenever this happened, I'd heard the word rape before. I remember being a little bit shocked that Vince McMahon said that Ken Patera and Big John Studd and Bobby Heenan were raping the dignity of Andre the Giant by cutting his hair. And then Bobby Heenan would carry the hair in a bag, which, was just so great. So great. And would anybody care about that today? No. Nobody would care about that today. Again, in where it's more common in Mexico and in the AAA organizations and, again, the hair versus mask. Sure, all right, maybe it means more, but nobody. You're not going to sell a storyline on a haircut anymore. But in 1985, we were all over it. And then, of course, Andre went away, for a week or two and came back debuting the short-haired Andre haircut, and looked great, made really cleaned the Giant up. He was a bit of a looker after that haircut. But anyway, this is one of my favorite figures, but I never had it as a kid, and obviously I have them now, and so that's short-haired Andre the Giant, part of Series 2. All right. I've seen, the relevance of these figures, all of them to me are relevant. And people talk about, well, S.D. Jones and Ted Arcidi and Outback Jack, figures that, weren't really, some say didn't deserve a figure, I suppose, but sure they did. I mean, any figure that LJN made, I was buying and was going to get excited about. So this figure is very, very relevant in 85 because he'd been with the WWF longer than any of us knew as kids. We thought this guy just came in and was this, uncontrollable beast. And then most of us started, if you're my age, most of us became familiar with him as he started to turn good. As he went from this uncontrollable animal to this good guy who was now, madly in love with Miss Elizabeth and learning how to talk. But and even as a kid, somehow either my dad or my grandpa or somebody found out that George the Animal Steele was a football coach or a professor. They would always say that he was a professor, but I think in reality he was a high school football coach. You know, and I was always like, well, you know, that's impossible. That's crazy. This you know, Steele needed a figure, obviously. He's a huge part of the WWF at this time. And like I said, or like I was saying, you know, George the Animal Steele was challenging Bruno Sammartino for the WWF championship. He challenged Bob Backlund for the title, right? In you know, late 70s, mid 70s, late 70s, early 80s. And as we watch, you know, a little bit of Wrestling with the Past, we might see that. But George the Animal Steele has been around, you know, forever, but became more of a cartoony household name in this particular era of WWF. And so, of course, there's a LJN figure of George the Animal Steele. Of course there is. And it's looks-wise, you know, how can you do any better? Now, there was a couple of, obviously we saw prototype pictures of George the Animal Steele with chest hair. And contrary to popular belief, those figures never made the market. And I know this because I got to talk to a former employee at LJN. And he had an LJN chest hair prototype for sale. And it was a catalog photo. You know, he got to keep he got to keep a figure that was actually in, you know, the Sears catalog or whatever. So it had a very slight pattern of chest hair. It wasn't completely covered. The arms weren't covered. The back wasn't covered. You know, the prototype figure with chest hair only had a neat little, I don't know, not even a V, but just a very incomplete pattern, you know, of chest hair. And it looked fantastic. So I guess that's one of the things that could have made this figure better. Now, playability, the figure's poor. I mean, it's you know, there's nothing you can do with an arms down figure if you're not interested in the character. Now, King Kong Bundy, which we'll see later, I played with all the time, and he's got the same pose. George the Animal Steele pretty much got no playtime in my Federation as a kid. I've seen some customs. I'm a member of a couple of LJN groups on Facebook. And, you know, they're great to look at some photos and, you know, watch the arguments back and forth and whatever. But there's customizers, obviously. They take a figure like this, and either they cut and replace the limbs, or I hear that you can sort of boil these guys and then move their arms around a little bit. But there's a custom of George Steele with his hand, with maybe one hand up, or maybe both of these hands brought up a little bit, and the figure looks amazing. So I think they could have probably done a hands up version of George the Animal Steele, and I might have played with him a little bit more. But anyway, this is your George the Animal Steele figure. Got 0 time in my play Federation as a kid. I met George the Animal Steele, and I had him sign a card at LJN, I think, or maybe somebody else. I think somebody was having him sign the figure, like a loose figure with a black marker, which is just, it blows my mind that people do this because it looks horrible. The wrestler cannot get an appropriate signature on the figure, and eventually it's just going to bleed into the rubber and you're going to have a black splotch on your figure. I just hate when people get their figures signed. But anyway, George the Animal Steele was holding, you know, he was interacting with everybody, he was talking to everybody, and he said that he joked around and said that his figures had all the paint wear on the butt and on the back of the heels because he was always being pinned in the ring, right? So that's where he got the most paint wear. And as, you know, that was one of the first wrestlers I'd ever met, so of course I was, you know, eating up everything he said. But George the Animal Steele. We mentioned him earlier, we may as well show him off. Man, when this guy came in, you know, again, he's built immediately as a challenge for Hogan. He's built up immediately as a challenger for Andre. He's part of the Heenan family. You know, they're pushing this guy to the moon. He gets the big WrestleMania 2 main event against Hogan. Great build up to that match. You know, if you remember on Saturday night's main event when he jumped Hogan in the Don Morocco match and just squashed him. And if you a little bit lesser known angle was when he and Stud broke Andre's ribs in Montreal in the actually in the Maple Leaf Gardens. I remember that because of that awesome ramp that the Maple Leaf Gardens had for wrestling. And he attacked Andre, and they broke his ribs, or they injured his sternum, is what we were told. And man, you never saw that. You know, you never saw Andre getting manhandled like that. So so King Kong Bundy, a great figure, one of the bulkier figures. You know, and that's what made these toys so unique. I mean, you're not gonna get this mass-produced figure that, I don't know, maybe weighs, I don't know, 2.5, 3 pounds. You're not gonna get, you know, part of the reason why they never tried to redo the LJN line with these Mattel, you know, vintage or retro Mattel figures, and then Jakks tried the, you know, with the classic Superstar. The reason that we're not getting these is because they're so heavy, and the packaging would be, you know, expensive. That's what I've heard, that we can't put these figures out in mass retail because it would cost too much to reproduce these and to package them. And the shelf space is massive, you know. I remember Toys R Us. You'd go to Toys R Us and they'd have an entire row of just blue, right? Just gorgeous blue packages, you know. King Kong Bundy got a ton of play. Again, it doesn't make any sense, right? They've got the same pose, but when you care about a figure, when you're interested in a figure, you know, but you don't have this is the punch. Ready? This is how I would punch. That's my King Kong Bundy punch. Oh, you know, you improvise. You know, you do a kick. Here's a clothesline. You ready? Look, you send Andre into the ropes. Here's a clothesline. There's my clothesline. Right? Here's the elbow drop. You know, so you're kids, man. You have a good time. You don't need to articulate the arm and turn the wrist and bring and drop the elbow. You don't need to do that. You know, you don't need. Come on, you just need to have fun. You need to play. You need to use your imagination. So King Kong Bundy had a ton of time in my federation, because he was very relevant. He was a beast. He was being pushed to the moon. Was he ever, in my mind, a real threat to Hulk Hogan? Nah, nobody was. Nobody was. Even WrestleMania 3, you know, with Andre, I don't think for a minute I thought that Andre was going to win the title. As a kid, nothing could beat Hulkamania. One of my favorite wrestlers, but I really think they did him wrong with the figure. But I played with this figure so much. As a good guy, as a bad guy. I mean, this was the ultimate untrustable character in the WWF in the mid-'80s. You could not trust this guy. He was flipping back and forth, heel face, teaming with Hogan, turning on Hogan, firing Bobby Heenan again. He was doing that all the way up until like 87, 88 or so. But the figure is just way too tall. Way too tall. And I know I'm talking about how we didn't need articulation as a kid and all that, but, you know, the figure's huge. And in fact, it's about as tall as Andre the Giant. It's about as tall as Andre the Giant. And I know these are all 8-inch figures, but, you know, we could have taken a little bit of interest in getting this figure down in height. A little bit. A tiny bit. Because he towers over everybody else. Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. But again, you made do. I mean, look at this muscular piece of rubber. you know, really basic orange, kind of an orangey red trunk and boot color. Sure, we could have put him in white trunks with the Mr. Wonderful on the back. We could have just added Mr. Wonderful to the red. We could have added, you know, OP, as he had on his boots for some reason, OP, you know, Orndorff Paul. But I always noticed that about Paul Orndorff. He always had his initials reversed on his trunks or on his boots. Could have done a little bit of a better job with this figure, but ton of play in my Federation, both as a bad guy and a good guy. Tons of time. And it's, you know, it's a good figure. It's a bulky figure. The next two kind of come together, I suppose. They were sold together. They were sold as individuals on individual cards, but they were also sold as a tag team 2-pack. Rightfully so. They are the former WWF tag team champions. I'll do this one first. We got the Barber. Well, not the Barber yet. We've got Brutus Beefcake. And this is great. You know, this is a great figure. I played with Brutus Beefcake a great deal as a kid. Both bad guy and good guy. At one point I did turn him into Rick Rude. Because the Rick Rude figure is horrible. But I turned him into Rick Rude before '89, so maybe whenever Rick Rude was around, I might have transitioned Beefcake out and Rick Rude in, because that's what you did as a kid. And you know, I remember '85 Brutus Beefcake becoming a part of the WWF. Learning much later in life that he was a very close friend of Hulk Hogan's, and Hulk Hogan brought him in. But he would, you know, this is basically the outfit that he wore when he debuted, and he would come out during a WWF Championship Wrestling episode, and he would just strut around the ring. That's it. Just this guy coming from the back, strutting around the ring, and then walking off. And you know, the announcers were like, you know, who is this? And what is this guy doing? And I think at one point they identified him as a beefcake. And then maybe that's how the Brutus Beefcake happened. I don't know. But that's how he came to the WWF. He would come out during an episode of Championship Wrestling, during a squash match, and he would just strut around ringside and then leave. And then shortly would make his debut. Yeah, Brutus Beefcake got a ton of playtime in the old Fed. One of my favorite figures as a kid, and by that I mean most playtime, was this final figure of Series 2. Just because it's such a versatile character, right? It's such a great bad guy character. Because you can easily put the Intercontinental title on this guy, which he obviously had in real life. I think you could even put the World's Heavyweight title on him. You could put the tag team titles on him. You know, he's just a great character to have. Great bad guy, and great play pose, and got a ton of time in my Federation. We're talking about Greg the Hammer Valentine, of course. I love this figure. I love the way it looks. I love the pose that they gave him. It's a great figure. So plain, you know, so basic, but so great. And Greg Valentine was always up in the rankings, always up as a challenger in my Federation. And there's some, you know, we've always bought into the whole LJN variant craze, and people are paying more money for brown boots and red boots Piper, and it's been debunked, guys. You know, there most variants, and this is straight from the mouth of former LJN employee. Most variants were just paint differences, not on purpose. Nobody in 1985 is sitting in a factory mass producing these figures going, look guys, let's do a lighter shade of brown versus the shade of red for boots. Let's do both and just make people go crazy 35 years later. Let's do that. Okay? Of course not. Paint is not perfect. There's different factories. There's different production plants. There's different materials. And so brown boot piper is not a variant. Red boot piper is not a variant. It's just a different paint color. And we've labeled them variants and we've put value on them, but there is none. And this figure had variants that people go crazy about. And like completionists want those variants. And so with Valentine, there's different hair color. A slightly different blonde, right? Again, just a paint sample, just a slight difference in paint from production company to production company, to factory line. Come on, let's not get crazy. And another variant that this has is, and I just found this out recently, but you see the little belly button dot there on Greg Valentine. There's some figures that don't have the belly button. And people identify that as a variant as well. And again, there was no way that LJN was saying, let's put a belly button on one and not a belly button on the other. They're not errors. They were just mass-produced hunks of rubber, and some human error happened, and you get a no belly button Greg Valentine versus a belly button Greg Valentine. And collectors want both sitting next to each other. Right? And I can appreciate that. I appreciate collectors. How can I not? But you're never going to see me go after a different tint of Greg Valentine's hair or belly button free Greg Valentine. It's never going to happen. It has no value to me. It's not a legitimate variant. It's just a difference in factory. Period. But anyway, Greg Valentine, one of my favorite LJN figures. Ton of playtime. Love the wrestler, the history of the wrestler as well. Greg Valentine versus Tito Santana, like I've mentioned before, was one of my first feuds that I watched as a kid when I first found wrestling. So, because this set was released as a tag team, I'll show off the accessory that tag team came with. They came with brown belts. Brown tag team belts. Now, as a kid, these were gold. Not gold color, but they were gold. You didn't lose your belts. If you lost your belts, your life was very negatively impacted because you had no championship belts for your figures, so you would have to improvise. And I've used all kinds of things for belts. I used my dad's watch as a championship belt. Right? I remember going to the dentist as a kid and them having me pick a prize, and I picked a plastic watch. So I had my dad's watch, but at the dentist I picked a plastic watch because it was shaped like a championship belt. Okay? That's how much I was into this stuff as a kid. I picked my dentist prize because it would serve a purpose as a championship belt for my LJNs. Yeah. So these things, and some interesting stuff about these. These, first of all, we never had brown strapped titles in the WWF, so they probably just said, hey, let's give it a different strap to differentiate between tag team and world title. I also use this as my intercontinental title and all other titles. The world championship was the black strap. Any other title I created in my federation was brown. I used this belt. I've said before that the design, the 4 plates on each side and the round center plate was based off of the big green belt that Bob Backlund had for a very short period of time, that Iron Sheik had for an even shorter period of time, and that Hulk Hogan had for a short period of time. That big, huge green belt. That was the design. That was the style of this belt. That's the promo pic that they went off of. That's the design that they went with, which again makes me think that this toy line was starting to be thought about in very, very early '84, because that's the last time we saw this style of belt. So The belts were valuable accessories. Again, if you lost them, things were not going to be good. How could you have a champion in your federation without a belt? You can't. I'm just strapping them on the Dream Team here to show you what they look like on a figure. The belt, I've talked in the past about visual icons of childhood. You know, the ring is a visual icon. The packaging is a visual icon. These championship belts are locked in my memory of childhood. This look right here captures childhood. These little round belts on these figures is burned into my brain. Okay, so we got the Dream Team with belts. So that's Series 2. When we do Series 3, we're going to do it in a couple of parts because there's so many figures in each, you know, for the next couple of series. So we're going to do, maybe we'll split them in maybe thirds or halves. But we'll keep it going. Wrestling with the Past is coming. We got another episode of that coming up. In May, around May 13th, 14th, I'll be getting another deposit from YouTube into my account. So we'll have gone over the $100 mark again in May. And so they'll send me I don't know, it'll probably be about $110, $120 check. And so we're going to buy something together. We're going to order something. We're going to order probably something G.I. Joe related. And because that Viper pilot figure is so expensive, I'd feel much better about using somebody else's money to do it. So when YouTube sends me money, I will probably order that Viper pilot. You know, that by far one of the most expensive G.I. Joe figures thus far that I've purchased. Or maybe we'll, you know, since I'm in an LJN mood again, maybe we'll get something wrestling related. I don't know. We're not buying a carded figure for $120 these days. That's not happening anymore. I don't need any more loose figures. So I don't know what we'd get. I don't know, but we'll see. So that's all coming up on the channel. And you know, keep hanging in. We're almost, I got a feeling we're going to hit 1,800 subscribers pretty soon here. And that's tremendous. Keep the comments coming. And I'll talk to you all, you know, later. Good night now. Where's the turn off button? I can't find it.